Hey, what's going on, everybody? Bauer Brown here. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Alrighty, as you can see, we are back on the Map US, the tutorial series map, which is good news, all right? Because that means we're gonna keep plugging away on this and get some more work done, right? Looking at my map, things look a little bit bare. All right, so I'm going to do something about that. So what we're going to learn about today is placeables. We're going to start getting some objects on our map and get it to look a little bit more like a real map, right? So placeables, what are exactly placeables for those of you who don't know? Placeables are more or less, well, to be blunt, they're objects that you can place, right? It's not as simple as that, but in so many terms, that's basically what we got. All right, so down here we see some objects, right? These buildings here, these houses and garages and such, those are all objects, and I placed them there. So does that make them placeables? Well, no, it doesn't actually. What is the difference then? Okay, so if these are objects that I place, but they're not placeables, what the hell is a placeable? I know that's what you're asking yourself. All right, well, the way I define a placeable, okay, a placeable is basically an object, first of all, that has an XML, it has its own XML tied to it, right? And within that XML, basically is a set of, for lack of a better term, a set of instructions, right? So maybe that placeable does something, and that's the way I define a placeable. It's an object such as what you see there, or did see a second ago. But you can interact with it in some way. See, these objects here are merely decoration. They're just there to make your map look nice, right? To make it look pretty. Nothing more than that, just decoration. But a placeable, on the other hand, is a little bit different. You can interact with it in some way. It has some sort of function to it, right? So whether it's a garage that has doors that open and close, or perhaps it's some kind of a cell point maybe that has a trigger point attached to it, or it makes a noise, or you can change the colors, or just the fact that it can be bought and sold. You know, that's all things that make that a placeable. Those are all items that are defined within that XML that's attached to it, okay? So it's not much different than your standard object, right? You can have two identical objects. One of them's a placeable, one of them's not. All right, so the one that's not, even though it's identical, it probably does something a bit differently, you know, that maybe you can't see, right? So anyhow, let's get into it. So placeables, what do we use them for? Okay, well, like I previously stated, you know, that contains your cell points, garage. You know, you could have a garage that's just a static garage, but you won't have a door that opens and closes and that sort of thing. Lights that come off and on, right? Those are the types of things that are associated with a placeable. Okay, but you could have two of them that are identical, but one's going to have some sort of functionality that the other doesn't. Alrighty, so if we wanted to bring some placeables into this map, how would we go about that? All right, see, because I have this little square here, this little square area, square-ish, I guess you can say. And I had that set aside for, I don't know, maybe I was going to put my home farm there, I thought maybe, right? So let's get started with that. You know, let's get a farm going there, because I'm tired of looking at that square. I want it gone, right? I want to get something in there. Let's start with a house, right? The house looks good. So let's head on over to our base game, to the Farming Simulator 22 folder on our base game. We're going to go to data, and I'm assuming you guys know how to get to this folder by now. If you don't, shame on you. You need to go back and watch some previous videos, because that's one thing we're not going to be doing. We're going to be doing less of as we go, is going back and relearning things over and over and over. I mean, I know repetition's, you know, a way to drive that home, but at some point, we need to figure things out here, right? So we are in our base game folder. We went into data, and then we're just going to scroll down a little bit and go to placeables. And this is where all of your placeables live. Not every one of them, but every one of them in the base game live in this area right here. And placeables could be mods that you downloaded from the internet, or some sort of prefab that's meant to be a placeable that you downloaded from the internet, or maybe you just got creative and maybe you're a Blender guru and you made your own placeable, okay? Those are all items that we will host locally. And it's a bit different than placeables that I mean, not entirely different, just a bit different than placeables that are part of the base game itself. Okay, the process is just a bit different. But for right now, you can look through the rest of these folders and kind of get an idea of what's in each one of them. And the more you work with your map and you're in and out of these folders, you're going to know exactly what's in each one of these. And you can see just by looking at some of these are the brand names here, right? Like Easy Sheds and Karcher and Rudolph Horman. Rudolph Horman is mostly like your animal sheds and stuff like that. Lizard would be a lot of miscellaneous stuff that's inside of there. Take a quick look. You can see like the hayloft, an old barn, pig barn, wardrobe, that type of thing, right? Alrighty, but since I'm making a US based map, more or less, I'm going to go into the map US and I'm going to borrow my farm buildings from there. Okay, and right here you can see the farm buildings, and I'm going to look for farmhouse, which is right there. All right, great. Now you can see that there's 3 entries there. There's attachments, props, and farmhouse 02. Okay, I'm going to explain real quick what's going on with this. Like I said, there's an XML attached to each one of your placeables, right? But we only see one XML here. Well, what's the deal with that? All right, we'll explain that really quickly to you. Let's open up the farmhouse 02. All right, and real quick, I'll explain the process here. So when you start your map, like when you start it in game, so you're testing it or you go to play it, your mod desk is going to be one of the first things that gets loaded. And that mod desk is going to pull in the placeables file. It's going to say, hey, I need this. I need you to run this placeables.xml. Okay. And then when that XML runs, it's going to say, okay, it's going to start at the top here. It's going to go down. It's going to say, okay, we got something. We're going to call it a farmhouse. We give it a name. You got the function. A little bit down, you have image. This is the for the store. When you have it listed in the store, this is the image that you're going to be using. And it also goes down. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can see that it lists the price. Right here is the file name for the i3D itself. This is the path. You can see that $sign data. That's the base game. We know that it's coming from the base game, and it's following this path, and it's going to load this farmhouse02.i3D. Okay, so that's what's going on when the placeable loads. Placeable is going to say, hey, go find this XML. The XML is going to load, and it's going to take care of the rest of it for you. Okay. Now, concerning those other 2 files that we saw there, okay, remember what they were called? It was attachments and props. They're both i3D files. And right here, partway down this XML, you can see we have a section here called dynamically loaded parts. All right, that's exactly what's going on here. It's going to load those for you. They are part of the house. Now, all you have to do is bring the house into your map. And then when it loads in game and it runs this XML file, it will bring these in for you as well, right? The attachments and the prop. Now, there is a way, if you want to see what they look like when you bring the house itself into the map, there's a way to do that. And I'll show you how to do that. Okay. Alrighty, so let's get back to our placeables folder here with the house, right? Let's get our map loaded up first of all, and then let's bring the farmhouse in. Okay, so I'm just gonna click on that and drag it on over to my map, right? Because that's just the easiest way to do it. Always the easiest way to do it is just drag it over there. Alrighty. Oh yeah, I was gonna bring the other 2 in, wasn't I? Way to go, Bauer. All right, so let's highlight attachments and props, and we're going to drag those over. All right, now if you look in the XML for this, right, you can see at the very end of the statement here, at the end of the line, it says a link node equals, props link node. That's the node that they're actually attaching these objects to, and it honestly doesn't make a difference. What you could do now, if you open up Farmhouse 02 here, look on the scene graph on the left-hand side of my screen. At the very bottom, you see a transform group called linked, and then you have props link node. And that looks familiar, right? Because right here, we had something called props link node. All right, that's what they're using to link these two. So when it runs, the XML is looking for that node. Once it finds it, it's going to attach these 2 objects to it. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight these 2 objects. Okay, and then using my middle mouse button, I'm going to drag it right up there to that props link node and drop it in there. Okay, now, just for the record, it does not have to go into this props link node. You can drag those up and just drop it into the farmhouse. Anywhere in the farmhouse 02 transform group we'll be just fine. Okay. I just like to do it. They went out of their way to make that link node. So why not? I'm going to use it. Alrighty. So once we have that done, we can highlight our farmhouse 02. We'll hit Control B to get into interactive placement mode. And then we're going to click and just set our house down, right? That easy. There's our house. There's our placeable. All right. So let's see what's going on there. Alrighty, it looks like a standard house to me. It looks like the home farmhouse. Okay, now all your attachments are like the satellite dish, this TV antenna, stuff like that. And then the props are, whoa, slow down. You get a little ahead of yourself there, Bauer. The props are stuff like the bicycle, the brooms, hanging up over there. This flag, the chairs, stuff like that. Alrighty. So at least that much of it was really easy, right? We just drag it in there and there we go. There's our placeable. All right. Well, there's a little bit more to it than that. So before I leave this screen, I'm going to go over just one thing with you. Okay. And the way a placeable works. Okay. When you actually run this, when you load this map in the game and you run it. Okay. Now let's say, for example, that this house was a garage. It had a door that opened and closed. Okay, so if you're in the game and you walk up to this garage and you went to open a door, you may hear the door open or you may see it open, but you won't be able to walk inside, right? You'll see that the door moved, but to you, it'll still look shut. Kind of hard to explain, but let me explain it this way. And the reason that what I'm trying to explain to you, the reason that's happening is because there is two objects there, okay? You have to get rid of this placeable before you load the map. All right. And what I mean by that is you're saying, well, what the hell? That kind of stinks, right? Because, maybe you want to do a little bit of work on it. Maybe you want to put a sidewalk and stuff. You just want to test it. You don't want to have to keep deleting the house and bringing it back in and setting it down and deleting it and setting it. That sucks, man. Nobody wants to do that, right? Neither do I. I just want to test it and then I want to come back and do some more work on it. Okay, well, it's just kind of the way it works that house does need to be gone. You cannot have your placeables remain on your map when you load it up. All right, so the map, and by map, I mean what we're seeing here when we're working on it in the editor. Okay, so when you load that up, it needs to be gone. Okay, but there is a workaround to this, thankfully, that you're not going to have to keep deleting it and then resetting it down. All right, so what I want you to do is go up to Create, go to Transform Group, okay? And then we are going to rename this transform group Placeholders. Okay. Whoops. Misspelled. Alrighty. Sorry, it's a little late here tonight. I'm tired. Got a cold. I know. Woe is me. Suck it up and get over it. All right. Okay. So let's go to Window. If you don't already have it open, let's open up the User Attributes panel. Alrighty. So what we're going to do here is where it says name, we're going to give this an attribute. We're going to give it a script callback. This is going to be called onCreate. It's a lowercase o and an uppercase C. Okay. So onCreate, just like I have here. Except you want to spell yours correctly. All right, so lowercase o, uppercase C, that's on create. And then from the drop-down list for type, we are going to pick script callback, and then we're going to click add. All righty, so we gave ourselves an attributes here, right? And now all we have to do is fill it in. And this one's going to be called placeholders. That's a capital P, placeholders, and then dot, and then on create the same way you did it last time, lowercase o, uppercase C. Okay, and it does make a difference, right? It's camel case is what that is called, but it does make a difference. All right, so now that we have that, what we can do is highlight our farmhouse here, middle mouse button again, drag it into the placeholders transform group. Okay, so now what this is going to do is when we test this, when we test our map in game, because we're going to be testing it periodically as we're working on it, right? And you're not gonna, like I said, you're not gonna want to have to like set down each one of these objects all over again. I've seen people do it; it's horrible. What you could do, and I've seen people do it, is, and mostly it's because they didn't know about the placeholders transform group, is they just left everything in place, and then when they went to publish the map, then they just deleted everything, which again sucks, man. You don't want to have to do that, honestly. So the placeholders transform group, it's going to allow us, every time we open the map in the editor, right, it's going to put everything where it belongs so we can see, you know, what we need to see when we work on it. So we know where to put our driveway. We know where to put our sidewalks and stuff like that. And then when we run it in the game, it's only going to load the placeables, right? So you can't have the two of those load, because if you leave it there, like I said, I know I'm repeating myself, but I feel like I need to. All right. So if you were to leave this here, this object would stay right here. And then your placeables file would load a second one right on top of that. All right. So it's very confusing. I've done it before where I walked up to a garage. I'm like, what the hell? I heard the door open and I thought I saw the door move, but it's clearly still closed. And I was just confused. It was a mess. And you get the idea. All right. So anyhow, now that we got that out of the way, that's the placeholders. Transform group comes in very, very, very handy. All righty. So what else do we got? All right. Well, we have a file that if you look, let's see, if you look in mine is in my map folder. Yours might be a little bit different. It might be a map US maybe, or whatever you happen to be working on, but you want to be looking for a file called Placeables. All right. Just let's open up the Placeables. Now, before we get that far, if any of the files here that I tell you to open up, open up Placeables, or it's the store items or your mod desk, if you can't find any of those, all right, if you go back to your base game folder, go to the Farm Sim 22 data, then go to maps, find the map that you're working with, like mine's map US, and you'll find all those files in here. Just grab a copy of it and copy it over to your mod map, right? That's all that you really need. You don't need to do much more than that with it, right? So you can grab anything that you need. If you're missing something, just grab it from the base game. Not a big deal. We're going to modify it anyhow, all right? And since we're modifying it, that's the reason we need to have a copy of it. That's the way it works with just about any file in our project, right? If anything with the base game, we try to utilize any of the base game files as much as we can, all right? And it saves on overhead and stuff like that. And there's no need to have a copy of it if it's already on the base game. But if we modify any of those files in any way, shape, or form, then we need to host a copy of that ourselves, right? And by that, I mean we need to have a copy in our mod map folder. Okay, so now with our placeables.xml, we got that open, okay? And this is something that yours should look pretty similar to this. And the reason for that is when we did the video and we made our first blank map, there was actually a couple extra steps that we should have taken, but we didn't, because I knew I was eventually going to get to this point where normally you would empty out your placeables folder and your vehicles folder or file, your XML. You empty those out. And this way, these objects don't load up into your blank map when you test it. Some of you maybe have already tested it and said, hey, what the heck? And you realize that all these things loaded up. This is why, because we haven't emptied this out yet. Alrighty, so we're going to do that now. Okay. Alrighty, so since I have the Farmhouse 02, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that here. And right here it is. Here's the line. I want you to copy one of these. It could be any one that you want. I'm going to pick Farmhouse 02 because, well, that's what I'm working with. But if you have something different, or if you just want to copy any one of these lines, try to copy one that has the farm ID and the default farm property as part of it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight this. And the only reason you want to copy one of these is because we're going to use it, right? This way you don't have to copy it over from another file. You can use it. This is how we're going to get the process started. So we at least have one of these lines that we can work with, right? So everything in between the placeables tag, I want you to delete. Okay. And you can see that I have placeables version 2 up here. And then I have the closing placeables tag. That's what I mean by the opening and closing placeables tag. So I'm going to hit Control V and I'm going to paste that back in there. And we're going to explain really quickly what this line is that we just put in here, right? And this first line, and this is what happens when this placeable.xml, when it loads and it runs, it'll go through step by step each one of these lines, and this is what defines a placeable. All right, we have a map bound ID. Now this map bound ID could be anything that you want it to be, but it does need to be unique. Okay. So if I had a second farmhouse, I would have to name that Farmhouse 02, right? I couldn't name it just Farmhouse. All right, so where we have the file name is actually the path to the XML file for this farmhouse, right? So you see data, so we know that that is a base game file, right? And I know it's confusing that some files, some XMLs use $ data and then other ones just use data. Confusing, but it is what it is. All right. In this case, our local file actually has the $. I know it's not sure why they did it that way. Can be a bit confusing, but it is what it is. So anyhow, we know that this one lives in the base game in the data, placeables, map US, farm buildings, and so on and so forth. All right. And then we have the position, right? And this is where we're going to load that object at the X, Y, and Z values with the rotation. And then the farm ID, normally when you start a new map, your home farm is usually going to be farm ID number 1. But it doesn't have to be. So if you got a little bit ahead of yourself and you just started laying down farm properties and stuff like that, and didn't realize that your home farm is now farm ID number 6 or 7, well, that's what this is here for. So you can give it a different number if you need to. Like I said, maybe you got a little bit ahead of yourself. All right. And then the default farm property just states that it's the starting farm, right? So when the player first starts playing your map, this is defining that farm property as the default farm property, the starting farm property that he already owns. Okay, so I didn't really have to change anything here. Now, if you picked a different XML or a different object other than the farmhouse, and you picked a different line, then you're going to have to fill this in so it matches the location, right? So let's go back to here. So say maybe you picked let's go back to data, placeables. So maybe you pick something off the French map. Maybe it's a gas station or something. You would have to go back and you'd have to, redo that line. So it says data, placeables, map FR, gas station, right? So this is right here. It's the location of that XML that you're looking for. Okay. And then the XML is the one that's going to load in the i3D, just so you know that. So you don't get confused and put the i3D here. It's looking for the XML. The XML will take care of loading the i3D. Alrighty, so now that we have this in here, let's go back to our map. I want to grab the location. So I'm going to go over here to farmhouse. I'm going to highlight it. And I'm going to go up to translate. I'm going to click in the translate X box. I'm going to hit Shift, Alt, and then C to copy all 3 of those values. I'm going to come back here, highlight this here. Ooh. Just like so. And I'm going to paste that in there. Okay. And then we're going to do the same thing for rotation. Rotation, it looks like I nudged it a little bit, but I didn't have to. So I'm just going to leave those all at 0. And I'm going to come back here and I'm going to change this to 0. Alrighty. Just like that. And we can hit save. All right. So we are one step closer. Okay. And we only have one more thing to do. And basically, we've covered just everything there is to bringing in a base game placeable. All right, so with every one of these, for every line, for every placeable that you have within the placeables XML, we're going to need a store item, okay? Because generally, most of these can be bought and sold, and you can buy it through the store. Okay, so we need a store item attached to it. So if we bring the store items.xml, if we open that up, same thing. It's just loaded full of stuff. We're going to do the same thing and we're going to empty it out. But again, I'm going to look for the farmhouse 02, which I see right here. I'm going to highlight it and hit copy, and then I'm going to delete everything. Okay. And I'm going to keep the same thing. I'm going to keep the opening and closing store items tags. All right. So, see, I got a little bit ahead of myself. Okay, we'll delete those. And I'm going to paste that back in there. And you can see between the two, the placeables just had data, where store items has $ data. Okay, now the way that this works, at some point or another, you're going to get confused with the store items. All right, because everybody does this a little bit differently. All right, the way that I do mine, okay, and we'll come back to this once or twice in future videos, maybe even this one. All of your base game items, okay, any of the placeables that we are using from the base game, those are the ones that I keep in the store items.xml. Okay, now in the mod desk, you can see I already have a section down here for store items, right? And you're going to have to add this section in here, but I have one added in here, and I have the farmhouse in there. It doesn't need to be there, so I'm going to take that out, actually. Okay. All of your local files, and these are placeables that you have, you're hosting yourself. They're contained within your mod map, and they're not part of the base game. I keep those in the mod desk. All right. Now, the reason for this, there's a couple different reasons, actually. Now, if you're like me and you change your file structure around and, your directory structure a little bit and your folders are in different places, that's going to make a difference. All right. So sometimes if, you have everything in your store items, let's say, and you change your directories around, and when you run the game, you may or may not get errors within the game where it can't find a store item, or when you run the test runner, it's going to report back saying it can't find certain items. All right, so the way to make sure everything just stays error-free, and for me, I keep all of my base game items in the store items.xml, and I keep all of my local items within the mod desk. In this way, I never get errors no matter what I'm doing, whether it's, just within the game itself, or if I'm running it through test runner, I get no errors that way. And separating it, now you could keep everything within mod desk, right? And get the same result. You won't have any errors. But I don't like to do that because depending on how big your map is and depending on how many objects you have, your mod desk can get pretty bloated pretty fast. So I like to separate the two just because it cuts down on either one of those files getting too big. And in this way, I know where to find things, right? If it's a base game file, I know just to go to the store items and I know I'll find it in there. Or if it's a base game placeable or a local placeable, that I know to just come over to my mod desk and I'll find it in there. All right. So basically it's as simple as that. There's not much more, to that explanation. All righty. So once you have that in store items, that is basically it. Okay. So as far as bringing a placeable in from the base game, that's all there is to it. All right. So if I was to load this up right now within the game and test it within the game, you would see this house exactly as you see it right now. All of the attachments and all of the props would be with it. And it would be just this one lonely house in the middle of the map, just like you see here. Okay, so at what point do we need to host one of these placeables ourselves? Okay, so what's the difference there? All right. Well, I'm going to explain that to you. All right. So let's say, for example, you either downloaded some sort of prefab, okay, you're using as a placeable, or maybe it's a mod that you're using as a placeable. Those you're going to have to host yourself because they're not part of the base game. Or one other thing that could be an exception, like let's say that you take one of your base game prefabs, placeables, and you change it in some way. Remember that if you change anything about the base game, now you have to host that file yourself, right? You can't use the game copy anymore. And I'll explain why. So let's say this bicycle right here. If we move that, let's hit Control B and we're going to put it out here. All right. We're going to stick it out in front of the house. Oh, I don't know. Maybe lay it down, make it look like some little kid was out there riding it and he came home late for dinner, went running into the house with his muddy shoes, but he just threw his bike in the front lawn and he was in such a hurry to eat, and you get the idea. Okay, well, if we were to move that bicycle right there and then just keep everything as it is, with the placeables, and load this up in the game, this bike would not be down here. It would be right back up on the porch where we got it from, because that's the way it is in the base game placeable, right? But since we changed it, now we have to do things a bit differently. Okay, so I'm going to show you how we keep a local copy now. All right, so I'm going to go back to map, or actually I'm going to go back to my tutorial series because I have a placeables folder already there. All right, and this is where I would create my placeables folder. And that's what I want you guys to do, is to create a folder. Now you could have yours in map US if you want, or you can keep it within map if you want to keep it within there. But to keep mine, to make it really, really easy, I keep mine just in placeables, right? Or I mean, in the very base folder, which is the map US tutorial series. All right. So I keep it in there, the same directory on the same level as my map directory. Okay. and it just makes things easier for me in the long run. So I have that there. Do I have? Yep, I have another one in there called Player Farm. And let's get rid of some of that stuff in here. So this way I can use these as an example. Alrighty. So now what we're going to do is, since we changed part of this placeable, okay, and what we did is we can see it was the bike. If we highlight the bike, and we can see that that was part of the props, okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this props. Now I don't need the whole house, just the props. I'm going to go up, I'm going to highlight props. I'm going to go up to File, Export Selection, and then I'm going to go ahead and find, let's go Tutorial Series, go into my Placeables. Now I made this folder here called Player Farm. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to save this with the same file name, props. And it doesn't have to be the same file name, but it makes it a lot easier. So I'm going to save it with the file name of props. Now what just happened there is when I exported that, when you export something, you're basically like taking a snapshot, okay? And it's telling it the coordinates of everything. Like, you know, take this hose reel and I want you to put it right here at this XYZ value. The flag goes right here at this XYZ value. And the bicycle goes at this XYZ value. Okay, so it won't put it up on a porch anymore. It's going to put it down here. That's on my copy, right? So the base game's copy still has the bike up here, but my copy now has it down here. And that's what I mean about hosting something locally. If you change something, now you have to host that yourself. Okay, so hopefully I didn't confuse you with the Placeables folder and stuff, right? Because changing your directory structure, I know, confuses some people. In the beginning, I was a little confused about it, but hopefully I didn't confuse you guys too much with that, with creating a Placeables folder. Alrighty, so once you did that, okay, we need to go back. We have let's go back to our Player Farm. Okay, there's one more thing I need to do, and I need to go back into my map US, farm buildings, go into farmhouse. Okay, now this farmhouse 02, I also need to host that, and I'll show you why in a second. Okay, so I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it on my side, and we're going to open up this local copy. Okay, now this local copy, what I did here, everything else, all of this upper stuff here can stay the same, right? The store items or the oh yeah, you can tell it's late for me. The PNG here for my for the farmhouse 02 for the store item for the image file, that can stay the same because we didn't do anything. We didn't change that. The i3D itself for the farmhouse, well, we're still using that. We didn't change anything with the farmhouse itself. So that i3D, we can still keep that over on the base game, right? Because no reason to host a copy of that if we didn't do anything to it. But what we did change was the props, right? Because now we changed, you know, where one of those props are, that bicycle. We put it in a different area, so they're not in the same place anymore. We changed it. So now we need to change this. Okay, now with changing my directories around, this is where I said it makes things a little bit easier, because now all I have to do is type Placeables / what did I have that as? Player Farm, I think. Yep, I think it was Player Farm. And then I think props. I think that was it. Let me double check that just to make sure it's right. Yep, Placeables, Player Farm, and then props.i3d. Okay, let's go back to my XML. Yepper, Placeables, Player Farm, props. Okay, and it was that easy. And it just basically cuts out a couple directories. Like I said, you know, when things start being like more than 5 directories deep, that's why I keep mine where I keep it. Because, you know, when you have a lot of Placeables and sometimes you have a folder within a folder and you don't want to create all those extra directories, right? Whereas you can see this one up here is already knocking 5 directories. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, they're already right there. All right. But you can see mine's only at 2. Nanny poo poo. So that's the way I do it. It just makes it easy for me to remember. You know, I know that I don't have to put down map /map US / player farm / really easy just to go Placeables / whatever. All righty. Enough of that rambling. So that's basically all there is to it as far as hosting this locally. Now, for this one in my placeables, we have to change this, right? Because this farmhouse 02, this XML, we're not using the base game version anymore. We're using, a local copy. So this would also have to get changed. All right. So remember that data is the base game. Now for a local file, it would be $map dir $. Okay. And then \placeables backsplash. Man, I always say that. / player farm. And then there you go. Farmhouse02.xml. That's all there is to it. Now, I don't have to change the position because the house didn't change position, right? Everything's where it is. It was only the props that changed position. All right. So I click save on that. Now, what changes there is in the store items, I am no longer using this right here. And I'm not keeping this in store items anymore because remember, store items was only for my base game, right? My mod disk is where I'm keeping all of my local copies, right? And that's what I have going on right here. Alrighty, so let's just paste that in there. And we do need to change the address. Okay, so in the mod disk, this one here, I just need to put placeables / player farm. All right, and that's all I need to put in there. If you were going to keep your base game or your base game stuff in here, you would use $sign again, $sign data. I know, confusing. I don't know why they go back and forth with some files, but they do, and you'll get the hang of it after you do it a couple of times and you work with these files. Okay, you'll get the hang of it. Alrighty, so with all of our local stuff, that's covered now. So now if we were to load this back up in game and test this out, this bicycle would now be right here where we want it to be. Okay, so the same thing works with anything that you download from the internet. Okay, so if you download a prefab or a mod, now the mod I'm going to do in another video because there's a couple things that need to be changed around sometimes for you to be able to use that as a placeable. Okay. But it can be used. All right. But just to kind of simplify things, like say if you downloaded a prefab that strictly to be used as a placeable, you would have a folder here and you would keep that placeable within your placeables folder. And then when you get over here to your placeables, you would just address it accordingly. Right. So it would be map directory placeables, like my downloaded prefab, and then, whatever. And same thing with anything local that you have, whether it's a mod or anything like that, you would just, duplicate this line and give it a local, like the $sign map dir. You would give it a local address. And then you would keep all your for me, I keep all of my locals store items over here in the mod desk. Alrighty. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense to you. Maybe I should have waited a day or two to do this video because I've actually shot this one once or twice before, but there were some things I wanted to change. And tonight, man, I'm just really tired. I don't know. We'll see how it comes out. Maybe I might end up reshooting this yet again. Alrighty. So hopefully you guys got a handle on that. If you didn't, don't be afraid to ask some questions in the comments. And if I need to, I'll make another video. I'll explain it a little bit better when I'm not so tired and tripping over my words. Alrighty. So play around with that. Try to bring in some other placeables, right? And maybe put in a shed or a garage, or, just a few other placeables, spruce up your map a little bit and try to get the hang of that. And maybe change some things around and have to host, like one or two of those files locally and get the hang of that, right? We're going to be doing more of this. I'm going to show you more of this as we go along, just so you kind of get an idea of what's going on here. Maybe when I start fleshing out my map a little bit, maybe I'll just do a video on that. We're not really learning anything per se. You can just kind of watch me do a few things and see how I do it. And then, I don't know, maybe that'll help you out in some way. Or maybe you can just be bored while watching me work on my map. I don't know. Alrighty. So with that being said, I'm Bauer Brown and I will see you on the next one.